All right, everyone, let's get this show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. It's December 7th, 2022. My name's Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. Cloud Posse is a DevOps accelerator. We help companies conquer AWS with our proven blueprints so that if you're starting from scratch or you're just not happy with what you have today, then you should check us out. Go to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. Go to Cloud Posse again, cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. You'll book a session with me directly, and I'll show you what your future could look like. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. If you're curious about Cloud Posse or any of our tools or modules, this is a great place to ask. If you're thinking or if you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/officehours. We host these calls every week. Our call today is recorded. We'll automatically post a recording of this session to our YouTube channel. So if you enjoy this content and want to support what we do, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. Just go to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, youtube.com/cloudposse. So with that said, let's kick this off. One of the announcements that was brought to my attention, it came from Matt Calhoun. I really like this idea. It's something I've wanted to do in Spacelift, for example, for some time. And it is a way to interactively get secrets from the user at runtime. And one of those secrets that you might want to get from a user at runtime is something like an MFA credential, an MFA token. So why this is nice is you might want to use automation like GitHub Actions or Spacelift or something like that to trigger some highly privileged operation on a cloud provider like AWS. Maybe you want to actually enable destruction of accounts or destruction of resources, but only if an MFA device is present. Traditionally, that would be very difficult to do in a GitOps methodology. What this enables is a GitHub Actions step that will synchronously block on a web request until the user goes to that URL and enters whatever bit of information. Then that bit of information is made available as an output in the action so that it can be used in subsequent steps. So you could imagine now a GitHub Action workflow that requests an MFA credential of which you, an admin, have. You enter that in, and now everything else is fully automated. So it's still auditable, but if for some reason the runner was hijacked, it doesn't matter because you can't do any administrative things if you don't also have the authenticator device. So the gotcha, which I don't love, is, and I haven't looked into this further, but it's tied to this step security. And I think this is a smart marketing move, what they've done. So they should do that, props to them. But so this GitHub action is built around a step security itself, it appears. It would be pretty nice if this is, I mean, it's such, for this one thing, I just like to self-host it somewhere we trust it and whatnot. I guess one could argue, though, that maybe it's good that it isn't self-hosted because that's yet another attack vector. So an attacker would have to like if the attacker compromised your AWS account and they compromise this step, they can also intercept the MFA token possibly before you. So if this is on a separate service, maybe that's more secure somehow. But I don't know. I'm just postulating. Matt, anything to add? I saw you just joined a little bit late. I don't know if you got all that.
Yeah, I did. Sorry, my Zoom was like hung up. Yeah, I think you covered everything that I would have said. The one thing I don't like about it as well is that it's hosted by a third party, but you know, I think this would be simple enough to self-host. Like if someone wanted to spend a little bit of time to rework the interface basically so that you could run it in like your own Lambda or something else, it seems like not too bad. But yeah, overall, I think it's a pretty cool solution. And one of the scenarios I don't think, I know you said account destruction and that kind of thing, but like in our world, one of the things that we're really hesitant to do is anything that provisions or deprovisions IAM, IAM permissions. So this would be a great one, like for any time like IAM is involved, basically you have to add in some sort of authentication to be able to do it. I'd love to see that happen.
Yeah. This would be a nice little addition to BossBot.
Yeah, and honestly, I only saw it this morning for the first time, so I haven't looked too deeply. But at the surface level, it doesn't seem too hard to implement something similar that you could run on your own.
Yeah, I agree.
Understand the concern about it running on a third-party service. If it were only one-time tokens, though, I mean, I guess they're still secrets, but they're not in the same kind of classification of a secret as like a real secret.
Yeah, there's two sort of paths to third party. So one is that piece, which I agree with you, isn't that big of an attack vector. The second is every third party that you put into the critical path of your infrastructure that you don't control is a possibility of them going down and you not being able to deploy, to make changes to your infrastructure, to XYZ like out there. So obviously the fewer touch points you have with third parties in general, just the better. I know that that's not necessarily the life we all lead, but anytime you can run something simple yourself and have control over it, I generally prefer that method. But I get it if someone wants to choose them. It doesn't seem like a terrible solution either. And looking at them, they actually look like they have some other kind of interesting offerings as well. So maybe it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm guessing this is really just a hook to get you into the other things they do. I would hate to pay money for something so simplistic as this when already it's a death by 1,000 cuts for these things.
For what it's worth, I believe in the past this has been true. I have not set this up in quite a while, so it could maybe no longer be true. But I believe HashiCorp's Vault lets you do something even more simple. And it reminds me also, I think Jenkins has this as well, where you can have a workflow instead just request the secret, and then the server long polls waits for someone with credentials to unlock that secret to come in and click the approve button. And basically without that step, the workflow never gets the secret. I know Vault has that. I believe Jenkins does that as well. And
like that would be nice to have. To me, this seems like it should be a feature of GitHub Actions and not a full-fledged standalone.
Yeah, agree.
Right.
Well, there is. Sorry to step over you, Matt. I just wanted to reflect on what Jeremy was saying. There is a feature in GitHub Actions where you can wait for an approval if you're deploying or doing some action against an environment. It doesn't ask for a token. You really just have to click a button or something like that. But I mean, if you're, I don't know, if you're on a paid plan or whatever, and you have some sort of second level off where you can log into your GitHub environment, then maybe that's enough for the typical use case. I don't know. I'm just.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, I'd contrast that with Vault, where there's no secret stored. Instead, the workflow has to go and fetch the secret, and in trying to get the secret, you need to click a button, or somebody with a certain level of access has the ability to click that button and approve it. And that person themselves may not even know the secret. They just know that when they click the button, the workflow gets the secret, or at least a temporary, maybe a jot.
Yeah, and I think all that makes perfect sense. The one big gotcha to all this is that you have to have a working Vault infrastructure for that to work, which everyone doesn't. So
Vault is very weird because when you give it a secret, it spreads it across, 3 or 5 servers, right? So Vault's very weird. If one of those machines goes down, then you can't decrypt things anymore. Or I think you can actually set it up so that you can have a certain number of them have to be online before secrets can be decrypted again. But
Oh yeah, my my comment wasn't necessarily on Vault HA. It was more about Vault just in general. Vault is not like click a couple buttons and get it installed and it runs. It's a lot to install and operate and keep running in a healthy fashion. I guess that was all my point was there.
So this is kind of like what you're saying here, like if you could just read an MFA top P token maybe from Vault. But now on the Vault side, I'm curious if that request can be guarded with an approval step, because then that would be the perfect. This what you're describing, Jeremy, would be like the nice enterprise implementation of what we're doing, provided this request for the top P token can then be subsequently approved in Vault, and that part.
And I believe that is true, because the weird part about Vault is I believe most of these actions you can put something to gatekeep them. But then again, it's been, I want to say 3 years since I used it. It was back at another role, and back then there was a community edition of Vault, and they were slowly starting to deprecate features on the community version and add in their new community version that was HashiCorp trying to make you pay for extra features. So I don't know how much of that they kept, how much of that they said you have to pay for Vault Enterprise in order to have this. But I mean, I definitely think about, I would compare for folks on this call, if you are thinking about wait for secrets, you can look and see how much Vault, I think there is a hosted version of it. And that I would contrast, it'd have a lot more features. I mean, heck, they'll let you do your own PKI where you can actually have the deployment have to pick a new cert, 30-day cert every time it tries to, grab something, like crazy security features. But
let's
I'm
move
sure
on.
it costs a little bit more.
Let's move on to the next announcement. So the next announcement is also GitHub Actions related. So this is related to workflows and Slack and Microsoft Teams integration. Now, I'm sure a lot of people have already come up with this their own way and Jimmy rigged something with an action. Let's face it, you can do a lot with GitHub Actions. But now, sorry for my dog. But now this is a first-class integration with the GitHub app that you can add to Slack, for example. So here you can subscribe to notifications for a given workflow. So I think this is better for making sure your teams stay on top of like workflow failures for a given product, or for example. And it looks like it has filters even, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, what wasn't completely clear to me in looking at this right away was if someone wanted to use like a custom notification from a GitHub workflow, if you could do that. It seems like this is like the events are hard coded. It didn't look like this actually helps you do anything if you want to send, like, proactively send a notification from your workflow.
That's a good point. If anything, that should be like a first-class GitHub event, like just surface an event of some kind, and then it goes through the same message bus. Yeah,
that would be nice if you could raise your own event and then it would do that.
And it's gotta let me say, I want to see failures only.
I think you can in the filter, you can actually specify the types.
Event, the triggered actor. Oh,
event means pull request or push.
Huh. I don't know if you could. That would be really annoying if you can't just filter out for failures, for example. Good catch.
Do you actually have to? Yeah, so you don't actually have to call anything then in the workflow itself. This just happens. So basically, this is just a webhook receiver for all GitHub events, and then it sends a bunch of stuff via Slack. It looks like interesting. Yeah, that is annoying. Agreed.
Next announcement, I think it was also from you, Matt, or someone else on the team. I didn't have a chance to look into it. It looked like a simpler way to, deploy serverless workloads. But anything else you can?
Yeah. So it's like it's a drag and drop canvas where you can like draw out the architecture of your application, and then it will like stub out all of the functions and everything for you, and like hook up the, like you'll create the IAM roles, it will hook up the like the queue to the function and do all of that kind of stuff for you. So it's interesting. To be fair, I didn't actually get to try it. I only got to read the blog posts about it, but it seems pretty interesting that it's like drag and drop infrastructures, and then it, like I said, it stubs out like the Lambda functions for you, and you just fill in like the business logic basically of the Lambda function, which I think is kind of cool.
Perfect application, a service that serves interactive secret tokens.
There you go.
All right. Next announcement. Also didn't get a chance to look into it too much. Announcing Amazon CodeCatalyst, a unified software development service. So is this kind of what the other one was for Lambdas? This is for services, or an easier way to express the end-to-end like app definition for an app, including build and deployment steps?
No, this is Amazon shitty GitHub at best. I am extremely disappointed by this service, so I'm gonna limit myself at that. But it's GitHub. It offers code hosting, issues, cloud-based dev environments, and you can go to CodeCatalyst.aws and pipelines, and you can use GitHub Actions. They collected the worst of GitHub and put it in a product, which is good job, AWS. So CodeCatalyst.aws has a really nice website though.
Is it?
Yeah.
Are you saying like this is the evolution of code commit, kind of to an actual VCS that
I have a different take slightly, maybe just and I don't think it's like quite there yet, but I think what they're trying to develop is essentially like almost like a Heroku replacement, but on AWS. So you can essentially drop this dev file into your repo that gives it like what all the things are that you need to integrate with your, like what you should run on, what the integration points are, et cetera, et cetera. And then the idea is that with its like templates or packages or whatever, so if you think of them like Heroku build packs, it will spin up that infrastructure for you in the background and run your app on top of them. So I think that's kind of what they're going for, but it's not, my opinion, it's definitely not quite ready for prime time yet. And I think, yeah, Vlad actually posted the website for this in the Zoom chat. If you want to open that up, it does a little bit better job of like explaining what they're trying to do.
And kind of piggybacking on what Matt is saying, to me, this looks like an evolution of CodeStar, which has a lot of these features already kind of available to users as far as like templates for applications and deploying the services behind them and all that kind of stuff. Maybe it's a little bit more of a, it's an evolution. It's a little shinier, a little more modern, but CodeStar does a lot of this already.
But it definitely does greatly overlap with a lot of GitHub Action particular features, and does it a lot in not as nice of a way by any means. Be interesting to see where this goes. I think this is Heroku with deployed to multiple environments, see see where your artifacts have been deployed. You get visualization of the process. Like it seems like they're jumping into that space. And I think I even read something here like you can actually use GitHub as your like repo. Like you don't have to switch to code commit or anything like that. So I think they're gonna just start to try to integrate like other pieces into this, I think.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We'll see.
All right. Michael Jenkins, I know you raised your hand.
Oh, I made my comment. I was just piggybacking,
Oh.
saying that this is the evolution of CodeStar.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Cool. Next one is a small announcement, just that ArgoCD has graduated from the CNCF incubator. Now it's a full-fledged project with, I guess, all the funding and so forth and support that goes along with that. So congratulations to Argo. And last is, I don't have any, I mean, there's the release notes for it. Terraform 1.4 alpha just dropped here. So they're starting to push these. That means that the release is somewhat imminent, probably in the next couple of weeks. I haven't been following. Can anyone fill me in? Are there any exciting announcements in 1.4? Like in 1.3, we finally got optional optional defaults for objects, but in 1.4 I'm not sure what we should be excited for right now. Just doing a quick scan here.
Changelog doesn't look interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe more like a maintenance release then. Cool. Well, I'm out of announcements. Anyone else have something that caught their attention this past week?
I mean, this isn't recent, but in talking to folks, I know that there's been I don't know if anybody's seen it. So Brew, the person who made it, Brew, started up this project called Tea. And for folks who are curious, I'll throw the GitHub URL on the chat here. But yeah, it's otherwise hard to find.
Like, search.
Yeah,
I think it's tea.xyz is like the org.
Yeah.
I think.
And the reason why it kind of perked my ears up was knowing several different developers. I know a lot of folks get very fed up with DevOps teams and everything else. And one of the things that I guess I'm seeing is unfortunate about it is actually in the README, it even goes as far as to say that, you know, it kind of decries the use of DevOps tools like Docker in development workflow. And I don't know where they're going with it, but I know it's been something that I've been asking more folks about, because what I try to do myself when I'm helping a dev team is give them some sort of container workflow that makes it easier for them to transition their code over to deployment and to release. And one of the things that I guess the reason why this was created and the reason why people are really fed up with various ways of packaging stuff is a myriad of things. This is not particularly targeted at DevOps, but it eats into that, because the idea or the notion is that Docker fails people because it breaks your development workflow. And I mean, I myself think, you know, kind of the other way around. I try to wrap more of my development workflow around Docker, and I try to do my best to make deployment be mostly just slurping up the code that I've written and something that's very light and easy to test on my machine, And if it doesn't work well on my machine through Docker, that tells me that there's some problems with either the code or with the way that things are being released. I try to treat that as a symptom, not an actual sickness, if you will. But anyways, I don't know if anybody had thoughts on it. I know that, you know, you can compare this to somebody else who's also trying to make a new package management system called WarpForge, which I don't actually have a link to. I just realized there it is. Which is kind of another thing for folks to maybe look at for package management. If I remember correctly, this is hopefully gonna have the right demo on it. Yeah. So what they're trying to do is also make a better package management system. And their idea is to make something that looks like Git. So everything is checksummed. And when you look at a package, you can see actually the list of commands that were made to produce that package as a part of its hash. And the idea is that you have easily auditable packages for reproducing builds on a different architecture, for being able to do operations that are something more familiar to Git, where you could branch or otherwise alter the way that something is built and experiment on it and see if you can reproduce bugs. And that's another cool thing that I saw. These are more developer sided things, so I didn't really feel like it was a great thing to throw into the list, but there's my two things that I was looking at that I was really.
This is cool. It's a frustration. I was looking for a tool like this back in the day for Cloud Posse packages. In the end, I decided like, what we need to do is just build them for RPM, Debian, and, you know, call it a day. But I really wish we could just have a generic package manager that was like Linux distro, Windows distro, whatever, agnostic. With the convenience of basically like go binaries for every architecture,
Exactly what that tool wants to solve. And the interesting thing is that they do containers, raw containers. I don't believe it uses Docker, if I recall correctly. I think maybe earlier spikes on WarpForge did, but later on it just removed it. Yeah, T is a whole nother thing. Like if you look in there, if you look for their spiel on Docker, it's from somebody who's had a lot of pain with their DevOps teams. Yeah, PS, public service announcement, stop using Docker. So that really made me want to watch this more carefully and really try to investigate why people are trying to leave a tool that I still think has a good place with most developer toolkits. But
yeah,
well, I think one of the things with T is their main mission. I mean, it is to fix some of these things, but their main mission is that how to monetize basically like the deep down packages that a lot of other people like rely on. And if you read why they created this, they're saying like, as an example, like code, they give like Code.js as like an example of the whole thing, where it gets 30 million downloads a week, and the maintainers of that don't have any funding to maintain it, and they keep asking for it. But like thousands of other packages actually belong or actually use it as a dependency. And like log4j is another example for that. They were saying like one of the reasons that whole thing existed. I think there was a blog post that went along with their announcement. That's where I remember like reading all this stuff like back
I
in
skimmed
whenever it was.
through their white paper and it seems to be NFT bullshit. So they have
Yeah.
a token, they have tokens, and somehow everybody's gonna start paying T tokens for packages. And that's the
Right.
only way to monetize.
and they got a lot of money for it. Apparently, I saw that they got like a little over 7 million or something like that for working on this.
Yeah, I don't know what the thing was, but their basic spiel is that you, like Vlad said, that's what I was about to get to, is that you end up like buying tokens to download open source software, and then the tokens get distributed to proportionately to all the packages that are basically being downloaded, including like the downstream packages. Essentially, that's what their thing is, and they claim that they're not making money from it. It's just to distribute and reward open source maintainers. So
Oh no, it's so hard to give money to maintainers. Let's make an overly complicated process to get them money. Like politely.
Yeah,
fuck.
I didn't even read that far into their business plan. That's not.
yeah, I think
that's
that
not
is
plus.
their business plan. That's what this whole, like the whole thing, that's why it got created. It's basically to equitably reward open source maintainers. And some of what they're saying, I think, is pretty valid. Like the big projects like get funding, but when those big projects rely on like 7 different like smaller libraries, very rarely do the 7 different smaller libraries get like a chunk of the funding that's going to those bigger, those bigger projects. And I think that's what they at least that's their pitch of what they're trying to solve. I don't know that this is the solution, but I don't disagree that the problem exists.
I pasted the link in the Zoom chat to the white paper. It's a PDF. It has a graph explaining the token. They want to store stuff on the blockchain, which famously doesn't scale, and it's not like they're gonna actually use that. They're gonna offload everything to CDN. It's at the first read, I don't want to be mean, it's bullshit over complicated infrastructure. Yeah, scroll a tiny bit more. There's let me check which page was it. It's at the beginning of page 4. Yeah, that's the diagram. Which,
Yeah.
tokens,
These days,
definitely bullshit.
Wow. There's a lot of problems with that. Yeah, and I appreciate folks commenting on it. I honestly have talked to a few people about it, and I've kept my distance from their stance on DevOps, but this is even more ammunition.
Well,
yeah, I think
Not to
there's
say that it needs to be decried, but that I would definitely question something that has a monetization system built into packages that are ultimately, I always thought that open source licenses were supposed to solve these sorts of disputes.
So I've got a question here, which is, are we talking about packaging stuff in a different way, or are we talking about somewhere we can deploy a Docker container? We don't care what runtime or the architecture that is being deployed to. Just like the JVM, if you have a JVM and you have a Java application, no matter what the JVM runs on, you can deploy your application to it. It's a jar file, because that's what I suppose what WASM is meant to be fulfilling in that field, where it comes down to like deploying containers.
I don't think that's the area it's solving per se. It sounds like you might have this inside of any one of those. You could have this inside of your Docker container, but you could also run it outside of your Docker container. It's I think this is just solving strictly a way of distributing bits of binaries or.
Yeah, and I think explicitly one of the things that they talk about and using the blockchain for as well is that they want to basically like ensure that any version of the package that you install is binary stable at that version, including the entire dependency tree of that package. So like that's the other thing that they want to use the blockchain for, is essentially to like store like an exact like copy, including the entire dependency chain of a package, like to there, and then you can retrieve it, including that. So you don't get like that. I forget what the term is, but basically when one of the downstream dependencies changes versions or something, and you don't realize it, and you have inconsistent behavior between the same versions of a package because one of the transient dependencies has changed. So that it also is one of the things that they're trying to solve as part of this. So I think there's that piece, and then there's this monetization piece that are their two main like pitches from what I've read, but I haven't read too much on it.
All right.
I'm still confused about what problem is this trying to solve?
I mean, I think that the whole notion that developers came to me about asking me about my comments was being able to consistently install packages and libraries for development and for having tools to, aid in debugging and tracing, sometimes other sorts of binaries. So it was purely from a developer interest, although I could see it also being maybe used by designers or other folks, but end user is all that I was looking at.
Yeah, there's a few. I think like true package immutability is one of the things that they're claiming. So like when you download a package at a version, that package will be at that version, including all of its downstream dependencies, which a lot of other package managers don't do currently. That's one of the things that they say they're going to do. I think because it's blockchain and decentralized, outages and things like packages should always be available. That's one of their things. I'm only answering what their claims are. I'm not trying to say that any of these things are right or wrong, but when I'm trying to say, what do they say that they can, what are they trying to solve? I think that's the thing. And then they have another thing with releases, that the releases are signed by the maintainers themselves rather than a middleman. And then tokens as far as monetization, so that they can basically, like, you can distribute funding to people proportionate with the amount that their software is being used. I think that's those are their missions. We can all argue about whether those are good and different. They've done it, they haven't done it, but that's at least what they're saying they're trying to solve, I think, in a nutshell.
Good summary.
Cheers, thank you.
Okay. I was going to say, did that answer your question, Imran?
Yeah, that answered my question. Is it, because I was just wondering, is it just a transit dependency when you so I'll go back to Java now. So that's the thing I work more closely with. So if I've got in my Maven file, I want Spring version 2.6 or 3.2 or cloud config, and it might have like transitive dependencies, 30 or 40 of them. That might be part of that, which I might have not specifically say what version of it I want. Right. But I've say I want Spring 3.2, and it might download all these other versions. And then at some point, those transit versions might change underneath because it might be a later version of it. But Spring, the Maven doesn't care; it just pulls down whatever the latest one is and says, "There you go." And that might break something that I'm not expecting to break. Is that one of the problems that it's trying to solve? Along with how they can basically apportion cost to each of those libraries maintainers to say, "I'm using this much. These are their libraries across all my code bases, so therefore they can they should be paid X amount of money."
Yeah, I think those are two different problems or whatever. So I think if you Google the Node.js and the left pad project, that was like a famous case where basically some open source maintainer, so many packages relied on this thing. Some open source maintainer made some stupid mistake and broke the entire Node ecosystem because everyone relied on that package. And long story short, that person wasn't being paid anything to maintain this thing, but literally the entire Node ecosystem relied on it. That was kind of the thing. And they're basically looking to say, how can we fix that one so that if we have a working version, we can never get a non-working version, because an upstream package that relies on that downstream is always immutable because it has the entire chain cached at a certain version. And then second, how do we make sure that the person who maintains left pad gets some money to maintain this thing that obviously is a very useful library, because thousands and thousands and thousands of other packages maintain it. So let's figure out a way to give that guy some money who maintains it. I think that's kind of it in a nutshell. And
yeah, I remember the Node problem, because I remember the guy got fed up or something, or he made a remark and then he decided, okay, then well, screw this here. I'm just going to delete my package off the registry, and they had no comeuppance against that. That was one problem. But I suppose people that wasn't caching their libraries or caching their downloads in like a package management system locally, they had that problem. Anybody else that's on an enterprise that would have been doing that, so they wouldn't have suffered that problem, so to speak. But
maybe, yeah, maybe.
All right. I think we're done with announcements. Any questions people have looking for answers today?
I've got one. If no one's else got anything, or put something on there. So it's been going on for a while now in the new project that I'm on, whereas how they split up their infrastructure and the application code, where there's a lot of infrastructure that needs for an application, say lambdas, roles, queues, and so forth, but are not tied to the core infrastructure like the networking, the VPC, the security groups, and X, Y, and Z, and how they layer out their code so it works seamlessly between the two. So do they mix the infrastructure and the source code for the Lambda in one repository and have the core infrastructure in a separate library, or do they mix and match everything together? Or do they have all the infrastructure in one repository and then just have the source code in another repository, and then how they deploy that into those environments? I suppose this has been covered multiple times, but I'm just reaching out there if there's different ways of doing it, because at the moment I basically split half and half. So I have the core infrastructure sitting in one repository, and then I have the infrastructure need for the application sitting with the application. And deployment, we have something called a BOM file, which basically is a bill of materials. That basically every time a service gets updated, whatever it gets built, it basically updates this BOM file. We have different versions: an integration BOM file, a development BOM file, and a production BOM file. And then the deployment is basically, here's the environment, here's the BOM file. It will go and ask the environment, okay, what version of the application are you running? Oh, I'm running this version. Oh, you don't need to be updated. And then just process the BOM file along the way like that and just deploy out the infrastructure. But it's just the old question, do we keep that infrastructure and our code?
I think, the question you asked could be less easily answered than like, what is the best religion? Obviously don't start answering that question. But my point is, I've seen so many people debate all of this. I don't think there's any right answer or wrong answer. I think it's honestly like whatever works best in your workflow and for your, for your company. Like we've seen people be pretty successful with a single mono repo. We've seen people be successful by pairing the application related infrastructure along with the application code. We've seen, every iteration sort of between here and there, as long as you have tooling that supports it and it's a process that works for your, your particular use case. I think it's any answer is as good as the other. At least that's my opinion. I don't know if anyone else has another opinion.
It sort of starts flame wars between developers, who don't want to have the infrastructure code in their repos, because then they're forced to maintain it and they don't want to do that. All right, and they just want that. I just want to concentrate on my code and everything else is not my problem. Type attitudes.
Yeah, and I've worked with groups of developers who have the opposite, who are like, I want to control all the infrastructure that my application uses in code, and I don't want it to be like factored out into some other repo that I always have to remember to go and update. I'd rather just do it all in my central repository. So I think it really depends on your team and what they're comfortable with and all those things. So you could make the argument either way, I think.
Okay, I was just wondering if there's if people have had some sort of like a metrics that says like I've used it this way and it's worked more times than it's worked this way.
No.
I could throw it out there in a different way. If you aren't sure where to begin, because I think that when you're looking for data, it's true. If it works, it works. And there's a variety of different systems I've used in the past. Typically, when I'm starting out with something new, I'll look at 12factor.net, and I'll go through that rubric. I'll try to look at, okay, so how do I want to make dev and prod have parity, right? Or how do I want to make sure that when I'm evaluating this process or these dependencies, and I'm just literally reading off of these different pieces in this, right? If you can divide your application's guarantees into those particular things, you can usually write up, hey, I want to separate my infrastructure into this repo and into this one. Here's the different, you know, tenets of 12-factor that I think I'm going to go with, right? It doesn't mean that this is, you know, you should adopt 12-factor, but it's just like an example of how I would go about it, is to try to give yourself an idea of what your goal is with codifying and making that infrastructure as code. And then from that, base your metrics off of that. So try it out, go for a couple months, and then look back and say, okay, has this strategy been working? Have I been seeing that I've been able to maintain this, and I've been able to keep my uptime? And, you know, which, you know, use the language of whatever document you've created to say why you're making these decisions. And if you feel at all queasy about it, then it's probably a good idea to go back and then really ask yourself the questions on, well, maybe I should join these two repos together. You know, I've seen definitely people put, for instance, Terraform for their Lambdas right into the repo. I've seen other folks, and this has worked just as well. They'll go and they'll make it a SAM project, right? They'll use the application framework that AWS offers, and then they'll have Terraform call that, right? And they'll just find some way to sprinkle the state back into an S3 repo somewhere, right? But whatever you do, it's not a great idea to start from the implementation perspective, and instead it's usually a little bit easier to juggle the concepts of, so what's going to be the hard part for me when I take this to prod? Is it going to be that this Lambda is going to have a lot of changing roles? Okay, well then you might really want to think about, how do I make sure that the roles that I'm evaluating in dev really match up with prod, because I don't want to screw that up, right? And if you work downwards from sort of these higher level concepts, and 12-factor is just an example, right? There's lots of other people out there who have come up with different strategies for what does an application look like and how can I talk about it, right? But that's sort of my perspective, and I think that might give you some ideas, some ammunition for going in and saying, yeah, so I wanna pick my infrastructure as code first because that's the hardest thing, or it might be the easiest thing and it might never change. Then
So I look at it in different. So generally, good system design, you want to have loosely coupled, systems, So, and you want to be self-contained and self-isolated, and basically, so your configuration is not part of your application that you're deploying. Your application doesn't care about configuration. If it's there, it picks up and use it. So you separate out that from dev, UAT, and prod. We've been doing that for ages for software. When I was in operations for a long time, the key question comes down to, like, it's all well and good when you can pivot and turn quite fast, but when you're working for a large governmental organization, speed and agility and changing are not very, they're not very conducive to it. And they're also not very conducive if I give them something after 6 weeks, say we want to change all of it now to another 6 weeks, because they'll be like, well, we just paid for it and now you want to pay for it again. And then you go through all the procurement cycles and all the budgets and everything else, and no one's willing to pony up the money again. So it's sort of like, I've used it multiple ways. I just wanted to see if there was some metric to say, well, this works, because I know from my use case of it, where there's most churn, you want that tightly coupled to the deployments or the releases all the time you're doing. So you want to keep it as close as possible to the code, where it's not changing much, like the VPC and the CD addresses. They don't change every day or every release. Or every when I set up some network ACLs, or I'm changing security groups, or I'm doing that sort of like what's that called, internet gateways or transit gateways or stuff. There's not really that much churn going on in that environment, in that area, right? And the database is not really that much churn. The schema might change, but the actual the underlying software for the database is not very much churn. So I like to keep the stuff that's going to be churning most often as close as possible to the application, because that's where it's always going to be released, and it's always going to be coupled with the application, because the application needs it to run. So say if I gave an IAM policy for a role and it needs to contact DynamoDB, and then I might want to say, oh, it needs to put message on a queue, I might keep that with the application. But if there's a service role that doesn't really change, that's doing backups and stuff, that probably won't be with the application. It'll probably be with the core infrastructure. So it's I think I take it like bit by bit as in what's changing or how often it changes. But I just wanted to see if there was anybody else that had other thoughts and ideas. I remember Eric's talk about the layers.
Yes. Yeah.
And which layers changes and how often it changes and where it is and where it sits. So that's where I base a lot of my decisions on. I say, where is it sitting? Is it going to be changing often? Okay, high churn, then it's going to be with the application. Low churn, it's going to be with core infrastructure.
Yeah.
And
This is-
also concern yourself with quality too. If you want to make sure that iteration is, very rugged, right?
Mhm.
And you want to make sure that things are exact, then it's more important to focus on that. I hate to say it that way. Because I agree with you. I think that overall trying to reduce the risk of folks changing stuff that doesn't need to be changed is another way I look at what you're talking about.
Well,
But yeah, I mean, it sounds like as if you have an idea of what's changing, what isn't changing. So try
Yeah.
to min-max that.
on this question, and let's see if there's another question we can move on to. We have about 10 or 7 or 8 minutes left. Anybody have another question we can cover today? Susie, I saw your question. You had an Atmos question. I'm pretty sure the troubleshooting might be too difficult to do effectively over the group chat here. Sharif, I saw you shared this Hacker News. Yeah. They trashed the announcement. Pretty good. 4T. No other questions today? I have a question for everyone. We are migrating. So a number of years ago, we launched a Postgres database, and we've been storing all of our metrics and BI information in there using like a service like Stitch Data. We exceeded the limits of that now and really need to move it over to Redshift. And I was hoping it was going to be as easy as a PG dump and load to get all this data moved over, but it wasn't. And all the solutions out there say, use DMS, or use this XYZ service to do it. DMS makes a lot of sense to me if it was not just like this one time, like, I wish I could just PG dump, pipe, refilter to Redshift format and then load and be done with it, rather than setting up this DMS pipeline to do it for a one-off migration. Anybody have any simpler solutions? I'm not doing the work myself, so I can't bring up the specific error that was encountered by the engineer, but basically there are ever so slight nuances or differences between what you could do in Redshift and Postgres.
Is that from the SQL syntax or just the data types, or?
Yeah, I think it was SQL level syntax issues.
Yeah, it's not fun. Actually used to work for a company, and we actually did that. We replicated customer data from on-prem or the cloud, and all the MySQL SQL variants into Redshift. And we constantly ran into issues like that where certain things are stored in certain methods, and there is no way around it. Some of it, the customers just had to reformat their data because we didn't do any data transformation. And that's the big part, is you need a full ELT pipeline to really transform anything that's not correct. So you have to kind of look at all your data, what's in your database, look at the Redshift, definitions on how they're storing all that, because it's not standard Postgres. It is slightly different on some of those data types.
You did give me an idea though. We are using Stitch Data, so maybe we just add the Redshift database and we tell Stitch Data, pull this data from here using the Postgres connector, and then push this data there using the Redshift connector, and maybe we're done.
There's also an open source tool that I've used before that's called SQL Pipe. And it has a whole bunch of like ODBC data sources to do that kind of stuff, like to talk to different things. And Postgres, and I just checked Postgres, and it's SQL, like SQL Pipe, sorry. Like all one word. And they do support Redshift as a source or as a destination.
Oh, interesting. this looks like it could be what we want to do.
Yeah.
So this, as the name.
Scroll down a little bit.
Uh,
Yeah. I was gonna say, if you scroll down, they show an example of using it probably somewhere. They show you, or maybe it's on their main page. Yeah, there you go. And one of those things you can actually like specify Redshift, and it will like push the data from one to the other.
Looks like though this might be table level.
There is a whole bunch of ways that you can move data. I think you can do whole databases. You can do like, there's tons of different ways you can do it.
All right, well, that's cool. I will pass that along. Good tip.
It's big. How big is your database and how long is this SQL pipe going to take to actually, PGP
Yeah.
dumps quite quick. SQL pipe might be reading the data and then streaming it through to put it under. So that might take, you might have
Talking
to see.
tens of gigs. This is like data from Jira, from QuickBooks, from all these SaaS services that
So you're not talking about some sort of terabytes worth of data that you want to transfer, terabytes and terabytes worth of data, hundreds of terabytes.
Yeah, fortunately, our client list isn't that large yet. All right. Well, we are basically out of time. So let's just leave it at that. Thank you, everyone, for your participation today. That was a good session. If you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, head over to youtube.com/cloudposse and subscribe. That helps us out a great deal. If you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, go to linkedin.com/in/Osterman. Or if you're interested in seeing what Cloud Posse can do for you, go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz. Thanks everyone for your time. Have a great rest of your week and talk to you later.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.